Hello and welcome to the Blackburn podcast. We're here ready to preview this upcoming Sky Bet Championship game after our international break against Swansea City. As you'll see, I am not on my own. If you'd like to introduce yourself, tell everyone where we can find you, and hopefully dip into the comments on your YouTube channel and give you a little bit of stick after 3 points on Saturday, which hasn't been much of a problem at home so far this season, but a big problem away for us.
So you can check out our stuff at Swanscast. Just type that into any of the platforms and it should come up. Usually YouTube or Spotify, I guess, is the main ones, or Twitter if you want to look on social medias to give us a bit of grief or have a conversation or whatever. But looking forward to the weekend.
Great stuff. Thank you for doing this, Luke. It's always really well received by Rovers fans. I think it's difficult in the Championship, isn't it? The Premier League gets loads and loads of insight. You kind of know everybody is there. The Championship, it's really good sometimes to get an insight into how the opposition's going. We all have our perceptions, but you never quite get a true picture until you speak to somebody who watches them week in, week out. So in terms of, obviously, we're about, a quarter of the way through the season now. We've had a couple of international breaks. Things are starting to settle down. So how's your season gone so far in terms of pre-season hopes and where you are? How are you shaping up?
To be honest, I asked for progress from last season. We had a bit of a roller coaster with a couple of managers and flirting with the relegation zone on occasions. We ended up, being a bit more comfortable than it looked, I think, for much of the season, finishing in 14th. So I wanted to see progression. For me, that probably was still mid-table, but if you're going to say 14th was the benchmark, maybe you're aiming 12th to 10th, and we're currently sitting in 11th. So I guess that is where I was perhaps looking to be at the end of the season. However, I do think we have left a lot of points on the table and probably could be in a much better place than we are. Now, I'm not going to go out here and say we deserve that. We've got issues that probably make it fair to be where we are, I think, especially if you look at the XG charts, right? It doesn't necessarily match our position entirely. But what you've seen on the pitch, there's just, you've seen how close we are and then missed opportunities to be in a challenger at the top end. But unfortunately, those things are not quite there yet. I'm sure we'll get on to some of them throughout the video.
Yeah. So in terms of your lineup now, is it quite settled? Are you still finding a bit out about these new signings and things?
No, the lineup is pretty much settled. I think we know who our first team is. Maybe there's one or two positions that could change with someone coming in to do just as good a job. Probably haven't got the best strength in depth beyond, which is a concern. So I guess both things go together. There's not the strength and depth there. So the first team is picking itself. Probably not a good thing. And going into the Championship, where there's a busy fixture schedule, going into Christmas period and all of that, you want these players that are more on the fringe, that haven't quite made a name for themselves yet, or shown they were up to the standard of the others, to kind of say, well, actually, no, I am good enough. And I wouldn't be so comfortable with all of them. Maybe one or two slotting in, as they do in a given week wouldn't be a problem. But 3 or 4 in a matchday squad, and maybe you start to see a little bit of a dip in the quality of what's on the pitch. Because it's the same story when we're making substitutions, and it always seems to have a negative impact on our performance in every game. Whether that's because some of them are just not there yet, but they're going to be fine, like they're still learning and integrating with the team, because a couple of them are new players, a couple of them are young players. But in terms of like the quality that we could pick in our first 11, there's not really much of that same level coming on behind it. So, yeah, the original question, the first 11 is pretty straightforward at the moment.
So in terms of, obviously, we all remember Swansea from Michael Laudrup, from Brendan Rodgers, Roberto Martinez, dominating the ball. Even they come to Ewood Park, tend to dominate the ball. How do you expect yourselves to line up this weekend?
It would be the same sort of thing. We've gone back to that approach. Part of the reason why we had 3 managers last season. They went with Michael Duff originally. He didn't necessarily play that way, not as a priority anyway. There was bits of it, but it wasn't the philosophy, be all and end all like it is now and has been in the manager's eyes that you just mentioned. But we've gone back to a passing approach, basically. It's more akin to Russell Martin, but a little bit different, because Luke Williams was Russell Martin's second in command when he was at Swansea for much of his time here. Obviously, he went off then to manage Notts County, but then he's now come back basically as the manager. So there's obviously similarities there, but he is doing his own thing. It is a bit different, you know. One of the things that he came in and said was it would be like Russell Martin with more goals. Maybe a dig, maybe not, I don't know. Unfortunately, that hasn't quite materialised. So, you know, jury's still out on that comment. But that's what we're going to do, is keep the ball, try and frustrate the opposition. What we do then is, when you have the ball, maybe you win it back, we will try and put a high press on to get it back as quick as possible, especially in the first half, especially while they're all quite full of energy. You might see that tail off, you know, going into the game. But that's worked quite well for us, especially in the first half. So we've been quite strong. And we try and minimise what you can have an impact in the game by not letting you have the ball, essentially. Unfortunately, I do think that's masked a little bit of our defensive problems, because ultimately, if you've got less of the ball, you've got less chance to try and create with it. But if you look at the actual figures and stats behind it, as a team collectively, we are conceding far too many chances compared to the possession that we allow in the other teams to have. So that is a concern for me. And our 6 goals conceded this season doesn't quite line up. And I'm expecting at some stage we'll have a little bit of an eye-opener in a match somewhere along the line where it kind of all comes probably in one go and it's a bit of a drubbing. But we'll see if that comes. But that's the sort of approach we're going to take anyway. I don't know if you wanted the team lineup as well, if you want to see how we're going to
yeah. I mean, I'm very interested in terms of, because I've seen your recent results. There's not been many games where there's been over 2 goals. There's always you've always been in every game, certainly scoreline wise. In terms of the lineup and in terms of players that Rovers should be watching out for, that maybe we know, maybe we don't know, is there anyone you think we should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, so I could probably tell you the lineup. You'll have Vigoro in goals. You'll have a back forward, Simon, Darling, Cabango, and Josh Key, from left to right, that is. 2 in the middle then, Mac Rhymes and Franco. Franco's a new signing in the summer. He's probably one of the ones to watch, because he's been one of the best signings we've had to hit the ground running in quite some time. He's a player that does the dirty work in the centre of the pitch. Okay, he gets stuck in. He's dogged. He's just everywhere. And I guess, you know, in the way that we are playing, we are quite high energy off the ball. Maybe not as much on the ball, but that's where he excels. Is being that cog in the middle to try and frustrate you, nip at your heels, win the ball back. You know, get them interceptions. Just be annoying, I guess. But he's doing it really well, and he's allowing Mac Rhymes then to play well, doing the stuff that he does. Rather than having to get involved in some of this other stuff that Franco's doing so well. So Franco's one to watch in terms of maybe if Swan's going to assert control, he'll be someone that will have to perform. Going into the forward areas then, we'll have 3 behind the striker, essentially, with 2 wingers. Now, normally would be Ji-sung on the left wing, but he's just picked up an injury on international duty, unfortunately, and is facing 6 weeks on the sidelines. He's another one that came in the summer and has kind of been a bit of a bright spark from South Korea. Not quite ready for championship, but self-admittedly and learning in terms of the physicality of it. So he's still a work in progress, but has been exciting for us. Ollie Cooper will probably start then behind the striker, and you'll have Ronald on the right. He's probably the other person to watch now, especially with Ji-sung not here. And I don't really know who's going to replace on the left wing, to be honest. So that's the only position here that's open and up for grabs. But Ronald will have more of the focus now on, I guess, us relying on him, which is a bad thing, really, trying to make something happen. He's a Brazilian winger. He came in January, hit the ground running back then, but has since slowed down a bit, maybe been a bit, I don't want to say found out, but I think people know how to mark him, how to play against us using him. And he's struggling maybe a little bit more than he was to try and get into the games as a result of the opposition's tactics to try and nullify him. So if we're over-reliant on him, usually that's when we get the worst out of him. He needs space in front of him, whereas distractions elsewhere that allow him to have that space. Up front, I would imagine Liam Cullen will start then. And you mentioned the reason, why we've perhaps scored so few goals. For me, we are playing attacking-wise now. We're trying to go wide. So I've mentioned the 2 wingers that they have been okay this season. Perhaps we could ask for a bit more out of them. I do think partly it's not their fault, though, and it's the tactics behind it. We're going wide. He's pushing it through these wings. He's pushing it with the wing backs, getting quite attacking. So both Timon and Key will push up quite a lot to support. he kind of also acts as an inverted wing and comes into midfield. Sorry, inverted wing back, comes into midfield. But what seems to be happening is we're getting the ball quite well into these areas, dangerous areas out wide near the corner flag, corners of the pitch essentially. We're leaving our striker isolated in the middle on his own in the box with not really anyone in there. So if you're putting a cross in, there's one person to aim for. You've got to be very accurate. But then also the opposition can defend with 2 centre-backs, 3 centre-backs, and it's very difficult to create a chance out of that. So strikers are getting very minimal touches on the ball, whoever plays in that role, and that's a concern. And Ollie Cooper then, who's behind the striker, seems to be being told to support out wide. So when we are going forward in the wide areas, he's kind of there in the triangles with the passing pockets and stuff to try and create space, create opportunities, create chances for the wing players or himself to run in from the corner, if you like. So sometimes you'll see him cut back and maybe take a shot from outside the box or maybe a cross. But it doesn't ever seem to be much going through the middle. And I think that's the issue, because I think the opposition knows that. They know they just got to defend these wide areas enough to stop chances being created, and it doesn't seem to be an alternative for us to then ask you another question to think, hang on now, we need to move our resources elsewhere, which for me, that needs to happen for the wingers then to get a bit more space, which is why they're not really doing as much as they would or could be doing. So a little bit of a long-winded answer there, but maybe some of those signs in this game. But that's for me where we are this season, and the concerns and problems we need to kind of look at and address, because 8 goals in 9 games or 10 games, whatever it is, is a bit of a worry, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, can't it? But it doesn't always tell the story that you're seeing. So do you think it does reflect that, or do you think that you've potentially been unlucky? I mean, you've mentioned that defensively you potentially could get a hiding at some point, but
no, I think it's quite representative of what we're seeing on the pitch. The theme of the games at the moment is we'll be really good in the first half and we'll tail off in the second half. The last 3 results, for example, you've got Bristol City and Stoke that were draws. We probably could have been out of sight by half time. And when I say that doesn't quite go in line with what I was saying about chance creation, there was a couple of opportunities against Bristol that we should have scored. I think the problem is when you're not creating as many chances as you should, you have to be as clinical as you can be.
Yeah.
Now, some of the chances we did create, and the quality of them, it is improving slowly. It's just the amount of them is not enough. We should have buried them chances really and been out of sight. So against Bristol, we went 1-0 up, and it should have been more. And then the second half, they come at us, and it's really a different story in the second half. And that's happening too much now. Whether it's a case of us being a bit worse in the second half, or the teams we're playing are just not in the game in the first half and they improve then because of that. It's hard to say we are necessarily getting worse. It could be just a sign of us doing everything else except the final third really well, getting on top of the opposition. Maybe they get a bit of a grill in, they change their tactics and get back into the game. Or maybe in the case of the Stoke game, for example, I think it was more intentional, where Stoke allowed us to have all the ball, sat off us really deep. And then as the second half progressed, they knew obviously keeping it a 0-0 that late into the game, they've still got energy at that point to come at us. And the second half, again, was much different to the first. First half probably could have been 2-3-0 up, didn't score any of the chances. I don't think we created one in the second half then. And Stoke, by the end of the game, if they had won it, he probably wouldn't have been able to say it was harsh. I think a fair result was a draw, but again, it's the same old story. Against Sheffield United, better team in the first half by far. Surprised me, to be honest. I didn't expect anything going away there.
No.
But we scored a bit of an unlucky own goal, to be fair, in that one. But after that goes in, again, changes the complexion of the match. And Sheffield get that bit of fortune, but all of a sudden then the momentum shifted and it's with them, and we can't create chances again after that. So it's one of them. We have periods where we are on top, and we probably will create a few things then. But if we don't take advantage of it, we struggle then when that period goes.
Yeah, that sounds quite similar to us last season, really. And I think ties in with you saying that when your options off the bench are then coming into the game, it's potentially weakening you. That's kind of how we felt last year. If we hadn't scored with the team we had out and we hadn't scored early on, it probably wasn't going to happen for us.
Yeah.
In terms of any memories against Rovers games and your perception and your view on Rovers so far this season?
I think there's been a few games that stood well. There's been a few occasions where there's been I think, surprise results for us against yourselves in recent seasons. I think there's one I recall, might have been back when Steve Cooper was in charge, and we grinded out a 1-0 win at the Liberty Stadium. I think it was when Ryan Giles might have been playing for you.
On his debut, it was. I went. Yeah, it was.
I think.
Yeah, it wasn't a fun game for us, that.
I think you were all over us, to be honest, and we just managed to defend a 1-0 lead. That's one that stands out in my memory. And I think we had a 1-0 win away last season when Michael Duff was in charge. That, again, was against the run of our season and the run of your season at that time. It wasn't a result perhaps anyone was expecting. And Duff was kind of getting a lot of criticism and fighting for his job. And it was one of the games that was like, oh, false dawn a little bit. You think, oh, maybe he's turning it, but obviously didn't happen in the end. So,
yeah, I think we knew that was coming if you didn't. Being an ex-Burnley player, I think we knew he was struggling, and we thought, I can see what's going to happen here. So, yeah. But in terms of that game at the Liberty, I remember it. I think it was a 5:30 kickoff. It was a pretty miserable evening weather-wise. Ryan Giles made his debut. I think we had Ryan Hedges up front.
Yeah, because he's an ex-Swan as well. So
yeah,
I think he was
it was a strange old game. We had Ben Brereton Diaz had been on international duty, so he didn't play. And I think my overriding memory is Daryl Enahan, our centre half, who does many things very well, but finishing probably isn't one. And I think he chested the ball to your keeper from about 3 yards out. It? But,
it was crazy wind. It was one of them that we had a good season that year, and obviously I think we ended in the playoffs if it was under Steve Cooper. And it's just when you have one of them seasons, that sort of result goes for you, doesn't it? I guess. And when you're not, you don't get them. So
that was it. That was our season where under Tony Mowbray we were second into about February. We were about 16 points clear of 7th place, and we managed to finish outside the playoffs. So it was some achievement, that. In terms of going into the weekend, then, so you give us what you think the game will look like. I'm going to put you on the spot. Let's have a prediction.
We're going away, and we haven't. Look, to be fair, we've only conceded 6 goals. They've all been low-scoring games. I would expect that theme to continue. And after international break, we've had a few players that have gone. It really wouldn't surprise me to see a 1-0 defeat here, or a 1-1 draw, something like that. I know that's kind of on the fence, but it's really hard to say. But I'd be shocked if either team scores 2. It just seems a bit dull at the moment, to be honest, when it comes to like goal scoring, and just don't bet on over 2.5 or both teams to score or anything like that, because it's just definitely not a good one to be putting on at the moment.
No, but we all know the Championship, so watch this now. It'll be a 3-3 draw. It'll be an absolute thriller, and we'll take a draw, I suppose. Right, well, Luke, just remind everyone where they can find you, because Rovers fans do really enjoy going and getting after the game, the view from the opposition, because you kind of see a game from your perspective, and sometimes it's really good to get the view of the opposition after the game in particular. So if you want to just remind us all where we can find you.
Yeah, go on YouTube or any of the podcasting platforms, type in Swanscast podcast, and we should come up. Generally, we do match previews, and then any reviews of games is in our podcast, which is meant to be once a week, for sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's once every 2 weeks, but it depends on work schedules and that. It's
that's it.
Got to put the other stuff first sometimes, but we try to be as regular as possible.
No, it's listen. I know the amount of work that goes into these things, and they are. I'm sure everyone appreciates it anyway. Right, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. I cannot tell you how important this is. I'm sure Luke obviously knows. I don't quite understand the algorithms on YouTube, but what I do know is if you like him, but particularly subscribe, it ends up in far more people's feeds who like similar things. It'll even end up in some Burnley fans' feeds, which will really wind them up. So keep doing that. And that's all from us. And we will see you hopefully for a match reaction. But if not, we will see you Tuesday morning for our latest podcast.